Welcome to the Social Chase Show. Our guest today is John Pollins. John is the owner and director of CD Life Coach Services. His agency provides direct life coach services, mostly to adults on the autism spectrum. John has a bachelor's degree from Duke University and also has a master's degree in education. He started his career as a classroom teacher and later worked for the Connecticut Department of Education, training new teachers and then evaluating their performance to decide if they should be certified as professional teachers. He spent years working in alternative schools, helping students who need to learn in a setting different than the typical large public school. He helped start Innovation in Education, an agency that created schools in Connecticut jails for teens who had been arrested. He eventually became the executive director of Innovation in Education before starting his work with adults on the autism spectrum. How did you initially become interested in a career in education?
Well, it's actually kind of funny. The one thing I knew growing up that I didn't want to do was be a teacher. My mom was a math teacher. My dad had been an English teacher for a couple of years. I ended up at Duke University, and they were, my freshman year, they were starting what became this really impressive, nationally renowned program for gifted kids. And I just happened to know some of the people who were starting it. And I ended up having a great opportunity to, and eventually became an administrator in that program. Wow. And, we would sit around at night sometimes and tell stories that the kids were telling us about how unchallenged they were in school. We have kids with 150 IQ getting C's and D's because they were bored. And we were real critical of, schools. And I remember one night I said to some of the people we were sitting around with, I said, we're kind of being hypocrites. We've got every advantage you could think of. We have the brightest kids in the world on this beautiful campus, college professors, kids are motivated to learn. Said, it's in the trenches where these kids really need help, being challenged and motivated. And so I said, so I'm going to become a classroom teacher and specialize in working with gifted kids. So that's where I got my start.
Oh, wow. So what exactly did Innovation in Education do as an agency?
Well, I was at a point where I had an opportunity for kind of a career change and was approached by a woman who was director of special ed in a school district I had worked for. And she let me know that the state of Connecticut was looking for someone to create programs in their jails for teenage boys who had been arrested. A lot of what was going on was kind of like glorified babysitting, like, word searches and things like that. And there was a lot of criticism. So she said, I think, do you think we could do this? Could we put something together? So we met in my living room every day for weeks, and we talked about, if we did this, what would we want to do? Why would we want to do it? What would we want the guys to get out of it? And the conclusion we came to was that one of the things that they would all have in common was they all had adversity in their life. They all had things that made life difficult for them. And the question was going to be, were they going to become, victims who felt sorry for themselves and let those problems bring them down? Or were they going to learn to be what we called resilient? And, resiliency is the ability to overcome adversity. So we actually created our own curriculum that we used. It was called Resiliency Curriculum. And what we did was we actually taught what resiliency was, how to recognize it, who has it, who doesn't, how to improve. And what we did with our classes, we used social studies and language arts and science and even math, not just to teach them for themselves, but to use those as vehicles to teach kids how to become resilient in their own lives. So every day they were showing up, we were teaching interesting stuff about, the Supreme Court and civil rights, or, a psychology class, biology, but it was always geared towards how can we use this to help you in your own life, your real life, be more resilient and overcome whatever problems there are.
And then eventually, as they get older, they can teach their kids, their grandkids, all they learn in this program.
Yeah, we'd use books like the Four Agreements, and the guys would almost always ask, can I take a copy of this home because I want to remember this and I want to review it, and they would often talk about, my sister needs to hear this, or my mom or my dad, would benefit from this, and so there was a lot of conversation about that, about trying to bring it to other people.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, very nice. So the innovation of education, it sounds like a very interesting industry. What were the ages and what were the challenges?
Typical age for most of the guys we worked with was 15 or 16. We had as young as 11 or 12, but most of them were high school students. A lot of them had been in trouble before. We sort of framed it for a lot of these guys. They kind of headed in the wrong direction, and this was an opportunity to kind of change the direction of their lives. If they didn't do it now, it was maybe, going to really go in bad places. Challenges, for a lot of reasons, some of these guys hadn't done well in school or had bad experiences in school, sometimes behavioral problems. So they would show up to the facility and feel like school's a bad thing and I don't want to go there. And the other guys would take them under their wing and say, no, it's different here. School's actually really interesting and it's valuable and it's useful. So we ended up with very few behavioral problems in the school because the guys actually wanted to be in school. In fact, the first program we ever ran was a summer program at New Haven Juvenile Detention Center. And as you can imagine, 15, 16-year-old boys in the summertime are not too excited about going to school. No. And when we went there and met the administrator the first time, I brought a few of my teachers with me, and he was saying, don't worry about your afternoons, because in the morning we have a 3 strikes and you're out policy. And we said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, first time there's a behavioral problem, student gets sent out of the room, talk to them, send them back. Second time, same thing. But the third time there's a problem, they get sent out. They don't get to go back to school the rest of the day. And said for the afternoon, you probably only have about half of your kids. And I remember turning to the teachers I had brought with me, and I said, if that's our experience this summer, then we have failed. Because our whole idea was to make learning worthwhile and interesting and valuable. And I remember the staff at the detention center kind of shaking their heads like, these people are naive. They don't know what they're getting into. Summer ended and we did not have one student, not even once, get 3 strikes.
Wow.
Every student stayed in school all day, every day for the whole summer.
Because you made it interesting and engaging.
Yeah, we kind of had a process. We would talk about a certain concept kind of in theory or in general. And then we'd talk about it in terms of like show a movie or read a story or talk about something from history that was an example of that. So it went from the theory to real people. But then we would always say, well, what about you? What about your life? What does this have to do with your life? And how can you use what we're talking about to make your life better, to overcome problems that you have? And I think they recognized that, we cared about them, but also that what we were offering was something that was worth paying attention to. And it was interesting. Staff loved to sit in on the classes because they found what we did really interesting.
I could just see a bunch of kids just sitting there listening, and then a bunch of staff members just standing there and just looking at this like, never thought this would happen.
Yeah, the staff actually commented pretty frequently. They were used to being disciplinarians in the classroom, like the detention staff had to handle when there were problems. And they would ask us, what can we do to help you out? And I said, just get involved in the learning. And so our best classes was always when a staff member would be really attentive and throw out a question or a comment. And the other guys in the room could see, wow, these guys, they're getting paid to work here. They don't have to participate in this, but they're really interested in it and they want to participate. And, that's part of the reason we didn't really have behavioral problems. There was a lot of good role modeling by the detention staff.
Wow, that's nice.
Pretty good services. So how did you get started with working with people on the autism spectrum?
Well, all good things come to an end. After running this program for 9 years, unfortunately, the state ran out of money about 5 years ago. I don't know if you remember, but there was a period where there was huge budget cuts, and the judicial branch had the biggest percentage of budget cuts. And in their infinite wisdom, they decided that they were going to take a lot of the budget cuts from their juvenile programs. And they started looking at, just purely from a financial point of view, which programs can we close that will save us the most money. And they happened to close 3 of the programs where I ran the schools. So wasn't quite sure what to do. We still had 1 program, but it only provided kind of a part-time income. And I just happened to be approached by a guy who owned an agency working with autistic children. I'd worked with a lot of autistic people in my career, but it wasn't my specialty at that point. And he called me one day and introduced himself. He said, "I want you to come and work for me." And I said, "Oh, really? What do you want me to do?" And he said, "Well, I've got 2 teenage males who are on the spectrum. They're both kind of behavioral issues, and in fact, both have violent issues, aggression. They both had been hospitalized a few times." And I said, "So what does that have to do with me?" And he said, "Well, all of the best therapists in my agency, we've tried, and nothing seems to really be working all that well." And I said, well, why are you calling me? And he said, "Well, I know a couple of people who have worked with you over the years, and they have said that you're really smart, really good thinking on your feet, great with people. So I was thinking maybe you could take a shot at it." And so I started working with these 2 guys, and went really well with both of them. One of them had no more issues of aggression, started really straightening his life out, doing well in school, much more stable at home. The other one we were making some real progress with, but he had some deeper issues and needed some special attention. But it went really well. And he said, your other gig isn't going so great right now with the budget cuts. Why don't you take on some more clients? So I did. In order to do that, you have to have national certification. So I became certified as a registered behavior therapist. There's a national exam for that. And so for a couple years, I worked primarily with children on the spectrum. Eventually, a really good friend of mine is one of the top psychologists in the state working with adults on the spectrum. And he had been encouraging me for years to work with the adult population. And I never really understood why until I went to a conference that the Department of Social Services was having for life coach, people who wanted to be life coaches.
Yeah.
And I remember there was about 20 of us in the room. This is life coaches for adults. And at the first break, I went up to the lady who was running it, who was really smart. And I said, "Wow, it looks like there's about 3 of us that, we understand autism, we understand applied behavioral analysis and some of the theories that work well. We know the vocabulary. The other 17 or 18 people seemed like really new, I guess they're just getting into it." And I remember she went, and I said, "Oh, what's wrong?" And she said, "All of these people are currently life coaches." And I said, "Well, how can they be life coaches if they don't understand any of this?" And she explained to me that for children, insurance companies and schools will pay for the services. And therefore, the insurance companies have a lot of clout. They can say, "Well, we're not going to hire anyone, we're not going to pay them unless they're nationally certified." Unfortunately, with the adult population, when someone turns 18, insurance companies won't pay for it anymore. Colleges don't pay for the services, so when someone's out of high school, families have to pay for this on their own, and individual families don't have the kind of clout that insurance companies do. So
Yeah.
there is no national certification for working with the adult population. Anybody can call themselves a life coach. So there's very few of us out there that actually really know what we're doing in the field.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, there should be more than that.
Once you leave the school system, you basically have limited options to help throughout life.
Yeah, and it's great when people are identified early enough that they can get those services that are provided by the school or by insurance companies, and get a lot of really great direction before they turn 18. There's a lot of people, though, who don't have autism identified until high school or beyond. So it's challenging for them. to not have had those services earlier.
So what different types of work do you do with your clients?
Well, it breaks into several different categories. I do a lot of vocational work. A lot of my clients seem to be in their 20s, particularly since COVID. A lot of people were in their 20s, maybe done with school, either done with high school, maybe in college, or even done with college. But COVID kind of shut everything down, and they were looking for some direction. Worked with a lot of clients who they were not working at the time. And so, to help people get jobs, one of the things I do is I do about a 6-week series on interview skills. People on the spectrum tend to have one of the common denominators is some social issues. And so understanding the whole interview process and looking at it from the employer's point of view. So I do a lot of teaching of interview skills, help people identify what areas might be good for them to work in. I help create a resume for them. I help them create a profile on Indeed.com so that, the focus of going through and finding the jobs to interview is sometimes difficult for people.
Right.
So if they're on Indeed, I can look up a whole bunch of jobs and just email it to them and say, apply to this list, and they've already have their profile there. And we've had really good success rate between, the interview skills and the work that we've done. A lot of clients have been able to get work. Some part-time, some looking for full-time work. Also do some educational work. Sometimes I'll have a student who's already in a class, provide some guidance and direction. Time management is an issue for a lot of people. How do you figure out exactly what you have to get done and what day do you have to do it all to have everything done by the end of the week? In other cases, I have clients who maybe are finished with high school and they know that they should get some more education, but they're not sure where. So I help them figure out the right program, whether it's a technical program, like a welding program, community college, or even a four-year school, 4-year college. I do a lot of independent life skills work. That's more somebody maybe in their 20s, family wasn't sure if they were going to be comfortable with this person, like kind of living on their own in their in their own apartment. And for the first time, they're going to step up and take that challenge. So I show up once a week to make sure that they're buying healthy food and eating healthy.
Yeah.
They have a system to make sure that their bills are getting paid. For guys in particular, I find most guys have a very different view of what a clean kitchen sink or a clean bathroom, a clean toilet is. So I actually teach people how to clean, other things like that, so that people are able to live independently and families know that those kinds of things are being taken care of. Also do, as I said, social issues are a big thing for a lot of people on the spectrum. It's understanding other people's behavior and the meaning behind it, being able to get better at interpreting other people's behavior, other people's reactions to what they're going to do. A lot of the work is helping people get better perspective, being able to see things from their parents' point of view, or from their boss's point of view, or from a friend's point of view.
Or like a sibling.
Absolutely.
Point of view.
Yeah, and the more someone is able to see an issue from someone else's point of view, the more successful they're going to be in working with that. I've also had the opportunity, again, as Chase knows firsthand, to teach a bunch of clients how to drive.
That probably is fun.
It takes a lot of patience because everybody at the very beginning is bad at driving,
Yeah.
just about. Most people have very little experience, so it takes a lot. It always starts out in a parking lot, but
Empty parking lot. Make sure no light or lamps are around.
right. And then eventually, maybe a parking lot that has some moving cars just to spice it up a little bit. But
Yeah.
I've taught several people to drive. It's been interesting.
Yeah, parking lots are pretty easy to drive on since it's not too busy on road with the many cars.
Yeah, once you get on the freeway or the highway, that's when I can see myself kind of freaking out, like, oh my God, where's the car going next? Where's it going next? Where is it going next?
And a lot of the clients I work with have some focus issues, and driving a car is not something that it works real well if you stop paying attention to what you're doing.
Especially if it's like you're used to driving a video game car instead of a real life car. It's like with my brother, he's more into the video game aspect. So him driving like a Mario Kart is going to be, when he does decide to get behind the wheel, it's going to be much different than trying to drive a video game car, which he's used to.
Very different experience, for sure. In fact, the first client that I worked with in driving, she had some real focus issues. And when she would lose focus, for most people, if there's a problem when you're driving, kind of your instinct is just to hit the brake. In other words, just to stop. Her instinct when she would lose focus or something would surprise her was always to hit the gas. So we started out in really big parking lots so that even if she hit the gas and kept going, she didn't hit anything. But she ended up getting her on the highway, and she drives to work every day on the highway. So that was a big accomplishment.
That would have been a huge accomplishment.
Indeed. So, what are some of the most interesting things you have done as a life coach?
Wow. I guess, for me, it's easier to think of specific clients. And kind of each one is a story. I don't have a cookie cutter approach that I use. I get to know the family, I get to know the client, and we figure out, what do they need to do. One of my most interesting clients, I'll call him D, was born blind.
Oh, wow.
When I first met him, he used to talk about how, he said he's 68, 69 years old now. So when he was growing up in the 40s, his favorite thing was him and his dad, to go to his grandfather's house, and they had a phonograph where they'd play records, classical music and jazz music. And he said, I loved sitting on the floor. My grandfather would be in an easy chair, and I'd have my head on my hand and my elbow on his knee. The next day I was old, it was December, Christmas music was playing. He got up, bumped into the family's piano, and it made a noise. And so he hit it, made another noise. He hit it, made another noise. He sat down, hit a couple things, and the next thing you know, with both hands, he's playing Jingle Bells. Wow. And everybody in the room knew what he was playing. Turned out to be a very gifted musician. He studied piano at the School for the Blind, ended up going to the Hart School of Music at University of Hartford, has a bachelor's and a master's degree. He's basically a concert-level pianist.
Wow.
And, of course, he's blind, and he's on the spectrum. So he's got some issues that he deals with. So I do all of his bookings. I book all of his gigs. I take him to most of his gigs. Because he's blind, sometimes he needs someone to accompany him and wants to go to the Hartford Symphony Orchestra or to a play. Take him grocery shopping, things like that. Another client, actually one of my very first clients, I'll call him M. I think when I met him, he was 20, 21. He'd graduated high school, but for 2 or 3 years had sat at home and really hadn't done much.
Yeah.
So, talking to him, talking to his mom, and we really wanted to come up with a long-term game plan for how to get his life more involved and productive. And he loved animals. That was like his big. He knew more about animals than any animal professional I've ever known. So I laid out a long-term plan. First thing, I've got a connection at the Beardsley Zoo. So I was able to take him once a week and do some volunteer work there. Fun, glorious stuff like raking leaves and shoveling snow, but in between you get to go to some of the exhibits and hang out. They realized how much he knew about animals, and so they actually brought him on staff in the summertime to be one of the attendants at various stations to answer questions. He's the only person they ever had do that they didn't have to train him. He knew so much about animals, he was ready. So he did that, and it was like a formal position that he had.
So was he prepared because I know the Beardsley Zoo is a large area, so was he prepared for walking to the different exhibits or the different
Well, what they would
stations.
typically do is each day that he went there, he would be assigned one station.
Okay.
So he got to kind of stay in that environment, is just talk to people when they come up, start telling them about the habitat, different thing, history of the animal, and answer questions. So, but he was so versatile, the next time he came, they'd put him at a totally different station. So.
Oh, so he can adapt in whatever situation he was.
Yeah, he was fine. I think, what you were getting at earlier, I think if he had to move from one to another in the same day, might have been a little bit more difficult for him, but it worked really well for him. After the work at the Beardsley Zoo, we got him enrolled, kind of talked about the educational work, got him enrolled in a program for vet tech assistant courses. It wasn't so much that he necessarily wanted to work in a veterinarian's office, but it was one of the things that we could do that would get him some certification to show that he wasn't just passing interested in animals. So he's actually certified as a veterinary technician assistant, and then we ended up getting him a full-time job working in an animal setting. So that family, they were great. They understood we were talking about like a 2 or 3 year game plan, not, what can we get done in the next month.
Yeah, you basically set him up for a long-term plan instead of a short-term plan.
Right. And he, I have other clients that are interesting. A girl I was working with, when I met her, she had just graduated from high school. She was doing a summer internship in the film industry.
Ooh.
And they actually had each person who was there as an intern was making their own short film, 10 to 12 minute film. So, and we had just met, and I had known her for all of 2 weeks, and she called me one day. She was panicked. She said, my film is due in 10 days, and I need an office space to film it in. I've already written the script, but I need an office space, and I'm short a couple of actors. Well, I had done some consulting work for a chiropractor in West Hartford, and I called them, and they said, sure, in the evenings, on the weekends, you can use the space. So I told her, I said, I've got your office problem solved. And she said, would you be one of the actors in the film? So I showed up. I think it was like 20 or 22 hours over a course of about 10 days, where I acted in the film, but I also kind of helped her stay focused. And it was a great opportunity for me to learn not only what some of her challenges were, some of the things that I could help her with, but also to see what her strengths were, to help figure out how to use those strengths as advantages. When that was done, she was torn about whether to be in this play in New Britain. It was a very adult, sophisticated role, and I really encouraged her to do it, and it ended up being just a great experience for her. Wow. Like with some of my other students, she was looking for work, so we went through the interview process. She actually has applied for 3 jobs and got offered all 3 of them.
Oh, wow. That's Thank you, John, for coming on the show. We will have information on how you can contact John more about being a life coach at the end.
That's right. Thank you for being our guest at the Soldier Chase, John.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chase, for having me on as your guest host.
You're welcome. Thank you, and see you later.
Bye.
Bye.